Hi, and welcome back to the online study of preparing for PPA certification. We're now on Section B of Image Capture and Output. There's two items on the exam from this section. Section B says, identify and correct problems in images. So here we're going to be taking a look at elements that go wrong during image capture and how we can correct them. Number 1 says, knowledge of possible problems in image capture, including white balance, dust spots on chip, and flash synchronization. So how do you analyze problems on an exam when there are no photographs on the exam for you to analyze? Well, it's really going to boil down to the characteristics of the problem and you knowing and recognizing those characteristics. Let's begin with color balance or white balance. The idea here is if you take an image and you look at the back of the camera and the pictures are turning out quite blue, what's the problem? Well, the problem is going to be one of white balance, and you would correct that by going to the white balance setting on your camera and making the necessary corrections. With some of our previous studies on white balance, we've also seen that you can use color correction filters over the lens to correct white balance problems. But it might pay to read the question carefully, because sometimes I think the questions are leading you to the best way to handle color issues and color balance problems is to shoot in RAW and handle those problems in post-production. Next, we'll talk about dust spots. Airborne dust and other debris may find its way onto the lens and onto the camera's sensor, especially if you remove and replace lenses frequently. The best practice is to always turn the camera off before you remove the lens and turn the camera so that the sensor is face down so that airborne dust cannot land on the sensor. Dust spots and condensation spots on the sensor manifest themselves as dark, blurry little spots on an image. The camera sensor cleaning option may help with dust, otherwise it's proper cleaning of the sensor that's going to be required, and I would leave that into the hands of professionals. It's also a good practice to examine your lenses before using them. Dust, dirt, and minor imperfections on a lens, such as minor scratches, could manifest themselves in your images as imperfections within the image. Now, with dust spots on the sensor and dust spots from your lens, those can also be corrected in post-production, but prevention is the best medicine, and saving yourself the time in post-production is well worth the time caring for your lenses and sensor. The next problem we might encounter is an out-of-sync flash. We'll recognize that by the distinctive black band that appears on an image so that you're not seeing the complete image. If you're using a flash and you see that a portion of that image is black on one end, or top or bottom depending on the orientation of the camera, that's a telltale sign of an out-of-sync flash. The way you correct the problem is to simply go back to your shutter speed and make sure you're using the proper shutter speed according to your camera manufacturer so that you're using that camera's flash sync speed. Number 2 says, knowledge of how to correct problems in image capture, including white balance, moire, noise reduction, lens flare, sharpening, chromatic aberration, etc. We'll begin with digital noise. Digital noise is an objectionable appearance of imperfections within a digital image. It's almost always the result of using a high ISO. The solution would be to try to reduce the ISO and then go maybe to some sort of camera support like a tripod or a monopod, or to go to some sort of lens stabilization if you have that option. By and large, you can also eliminate some of the digital noise in post-production, but the best practice is to try not to have digital noise in the first place. Digital artifacts are imperfections that may be introduced into a digital image from the sensor, lens optics, JPEG compression, digital interpolation, or over-sharpening. Digital artifacts manifest themselves in the form of any number of ways, including moire, jagged edges, chromatic aberration, blooming, and more. Let's take a closer look at a couple of these. In this image, we see dark lines showing up randomly within the image. These digital artifacts are the result of using a high ISO and a slow shutter speed. Chromatic aberration occurs because the lens design is unable to focus the wavelengths of all of the colors to the same convergence point on the sensor. It manifests itself as fringes of color along the edges that separate dark and bright values of the image. In this enlarged photograph of the moon, we see some serious chromatic aberration, as well as a very descriptive problem called blooming. Now, you can use image editing software to correct some chromatic aberration, but your best bet is to use smaller lens openings and higher quality lenses. Another problem that may appear at image capture is called moire. Moire is a series of false patterns which sometimes occur during capture of certain clothing or even natural patterns. The wavy pattern can be seen in this bride's veil, for example. It can be corrected in post-production, but it can also be avoided with an anti-alias filter at the time of capture. Next up is lens flare. Unwanted lens flare is best dealt with at the time of capture by the use of a lens hood or by simply protecting the lens from unwanted stray light. Correction to lens flare can also be done in post-production by use of the lasso tool and using content-aware fill, but it's easier to just take care of it at the time of capture with a lens hood. Next up is sharpening. Sharpening an image allows the photographer to improve the look of an image by making it look more clear and sharp. The key to sharpening, though, is to sharpen an image specifically with the image's final output, size, and viewing distance in mind. Careless over-sharpening can result in the degradation of the image with unwanted pixelation. Barrel distortion. With barrel distortion, straight lines tend to bulge out at the center. The apparent effect is that of an image which has been mapped around the shape of a sphere or a barrel. In a zoom lens, barrel distortion appears in the center of the lens's focal lengths range and is worse at the wide-angle end of that range. Remedies include using prime lenses or higher quality zoom lenses, but you can also do some post-production corrections in your image editing software. Well, that's it for Section B. On to Section C.